Absolutely. Well, and speaking to the next and rising generation, Julia, what are you seeing as a next-gen minister among Gen Z? You are a counselor, and you're counseling young people through these tough issues. What are some of the most common things that you hear consistently, and how are Christian youth facing these particular questions here in Dallas?
Yeah, so not because my father's my boss and sitting on the front row, but I was called to student ministry when I was 11, so that's its own story. I've always loved teenagers before I was a teenager, which I don't, we'll have to ask God about that one in heaven. I've always cared about teenagers because I've cared about evangelism, and most people accept Christ before they're 15. And so after spending 15 years in student ministry, our church provided a way. They caught the same vision for we care so much about teenagers. We pour so much into them. And we were seeing, my husband's the youth minister, I was the girls minister. We were seeing all of these kids not go into transgender and change their, body parts, but they were not coming back to church. They were saying that we weren't answering the questions they had as a whole. And so that was really burdensome. Honestly, there was a lot of grief there because we didn't have kids yet, and we'd spent a decade pouring into kids who I believe were called to ministry, and that God had a unique call in their life. And as soon as they graduated, they were gone. And so this burdened us. We met with the leadership of our church. Everybody caught the same vision of starting Next Gen Ministries, specifically to help once kids graduate, girls specifically, actually, girls, Baptists, to help girls once they graduate be able to have something where we can talk about issues and what they're facing between 18 and when, hopefully, ideally, they decide to get married. And so I've checked with other people to see if maybe I'm off base here. I personally do not see a ton of kids that have really strong faith and upbringings, and they are sure of their salvation personally struggling with transgender. That's not what I see. That's not what a lot of people that I've consulted with are seeing. But they don't know how to defend the truth. They don't know how to use the Bible to explain the reality that we're male and female. And I'll never forget this. This is when I almost lost heart because it was people that, we devoted our lives to these people. They could not even, they didn't care that the Bible said that homosexuality was wrong. And they would never raise their hand in Sunday school and say it, but they're going to say it in the counseling office. And the counseling office is very different from 9:15 on a Sunday morning. And that is when they say, I don't care that it's wrong. This is what I'm struggling with. This is what I'm attracted to. This is what my brother thinks is right, and I love him. And so we're seeing much more. I keep thinking about the Jesus Revolution movie. So great. We're not associated in any way, but it's a fantastic film. And there's a great line in there. They say, the hippies were looking for the right things in the wrong places. And the same is true with this generation. Like, a lot of the Christians know. They know that it says you're male and female. What does that have to do with their best friend who is struggling? So there's a disconnect in practical application of theology and scripture.
Yeah. That application question is pretty thorny in this culture especially. Julia, a two-parter for you. It kind of is very much related to your response to the first question. Young people, increasingly, you say they won't say what they think is right or wrong, can't defend it biblically, or won't, or just there's this disconnect there. As they're faced with these peer pressures to not go against the grain, do you think that they're aware of the medical harms that if they have a family member that's ensnared in this, that, it's actually a loving thing to say, I don't want you to harm your body? Are they conscious of that? And so how are they processing these questions, particularly in the online social lives world? And also, speak to the parents. What is your most important piece of advice you would give them in this milieu?
Okay, I need to start by saying I'm a Southern Baptist pastor's daughter, so I always have seen things very black and white, like no gray area. And for whatever reason, God had me become a therapist before coming to work at a church. So I have always like my foundation is scripture. Like that is how I understand things. That is how I understand culture. And it's not to be light or be gray on any area. But I think becoming a therapist helped me understand that sin means we've missed the mark. Sin means we have missed the mark. Transgender is missing the mark. That is not what God has for you. That is not how he's created you. And it's so important, of course, to help people understand what's right and wrong, especially in terms of scripture. That's the foundation. But at the same time, what we tell parents with every issue is that you have to connect before you correct. And that doesn't mean that behind the scenes you're not like, oh my gosh, like get the internet down. Like we have to get her away from those people. Like, oh my gosh. But my first speaking job was suicide prevention in public schools. And I cared so much about it because honestly, so many Christian parents were unaware that even though, of course, suicide's wrong and of course it's from Satan, it's still something that Christians are struggling with. And it's still something that most teenagers tell someone first. It's 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10. They have told someone before they commit suicide that they're struggling. And so the way that I see this and the way that a lot of people in the Christian counseling field see it is, of course, it's evil. Of course, it's terrible. But thank God that they're telling you. They're telling you, or you've become aware of it before it's too late. So while in your head, you may be screaming and thinking, what did I do wrong? Just for reference, I have 5-year-old triplets, and two of them are boys and one's a girl. So we talk about gender a lot, okay? And it's so important, and it's a conversation that we are very much facing in our households whenever we live in Dallas, Texas, and there are people handing them ice cream that are men with their painted fingernails. So even if you go to private school, it's still at McDonald's. Like, you're not going to be able to get away from it. But all that to say is, you know, nothing new is under the sun. And we have to be able to connect with people who are hurting and connect with them when they're struggling. Even if it's alarming and terrifying, thank goodness you found out, or thank goodness you have them in your home for this short period of time. It is a mental health issue. Of course, there are other things that can happen, but I was trained as a therapist. I trained at what used to be Menarth Meyer. Now when I was there, I was under Dr. Meyer. And I remember learning that we didn't even need to know, not from him, from my school, we didn't even need to know about transgender because it was so rare. Whenever we came to the different disorders and we were taught how to treat them, I remember the professors telling us, don't even worry about this. It's so rare. If you ever come across it, you'll be able to find like the one person that treats it. And they weren't trying to trick us. Like, it really was not something that a lot of people were facing. And it's kind of the new thing of how we used to understand homosexuality, that there is more that goes into it. The other thing I do want to say is it's not a blanket fix. It's the same as with homosexuality. Sometimes it's from trauma, and sometimes it's from abuse, and sometimes there are lots of other factors that go into it. We've had plenty of teenagers tell us that they were not born this way, that they received so much rejection from the opposite sex that they are saying, I am choosing now to be homosexual. And so what's so great about scripture, among all of the many things, is that the truth is always clear. The truth is always easy, and it always provides freedom. But we have to make sure that we're communicating it in a way that doesn't condemn. Because if you lose the connection, if you lose the conversation, you lose the ability to be able to influence. And I know that it's hard, and I know that it's terrifying, but keeping the communication open while staying committed to truth is so, so important. And then also, there are lots of us who are still technically licensed, I don't know for how much longer, but that do care about this. Thank goodness this isn't, on the internet right now. But a lot of Christian therapists, our church has many connections. We have our Pathways Counseling with June Hunt, legendary, right here in the third row. Our church has been on the forefront of addressing these issues. I submitted a book proposal 8 years ago and included transgender in it, and ended up writing a different book. But they didn't think I should include it. I mean, this was just foreign. But making sure if you don't have a church that addresses it, you at least have that support of understanding and teaching people at Summit Ministries how to understand these cultural issues. But you don't have to negate scripture. You don't have to run away from traditional Christianity.